She hit him in front of his daughter. 3 feet away, a bodyguard twice his size took one look at his face and walked backward. That's not the twist. That's just the opening. Because the man she slapped wasn't nobody. And in the next 10 minutes, the woman who thought she owned this city was going to find out exactly who she picked a fight with. Stick around. If you like stories where quiet people turn out to be the most dangerous person in the room, this channel is exactly where you need to be. Hit subscribe, because what happens at the 6-week mark of this story is the part nobody saw coming. The cafe was loud the way Saturday mornings are always loud. Steam wands hissing. Spoons against ceramic. 40 different conversations stacked on top of each other until they turned into one soft wall of noise. Then the slap landed, and every single sound in that room died at once. A woman at the counter dropped her cup. It shattered on the tile, and nobody even looked at it. A kid by the window went stiff in his chair. Because Vanessa Cole's palm had just connected with the side of Daniel Rourke's face, so hard that people 2 tables away flinched like they'd been hit too. Daniel didn't move. He stood there with his 6-year-old pressed into his chest, one hand cupped protectively around the back of her head, like he was shielding her from something so much worse than an open palm. He didn't stumble. He didn't shout. He just turned his head back, slow, deliberate, and looked at Vanessa with an expression so calm, so utterly unbothered, that 3 different witnesses would later say it was the most unsettling thing they'd ever seen a human face do. Then her bodyguard stepped in to earn his paycheck. He made it to within 3 feet of Daniel, looked at the long pale scar running down the left side of his face, and stopped cold. All the color drained out of him in about 2 seconds flat. He took a step backward, a trained professional, backing away from an unarmed man who hadn't even raised his hands. Something was very, very wrong here, and it had nothing to do with a spilled hot chocolate. Let's rewind 6 hours. Daniel Rourke woke up at 6:15 that morning, same as every morning for the last 15 years. No alarm needed. His body simply refused to sleep past dawn, one of the few habits the army never let him put down. He didn't fight it anymore. He made coffee, sat in the quiet, let the apartment be still before the world woke up and started demanding things from him. By 7, he knew Nora was awake before he heard a single word, because the whole apartment shifted. Feet hitting the floor. A drawer opening and slamming 3 times for no reason at all. Then his 6-year-old daughter appeared in the kitchen doorway in mismatched socks, wearing the expression of someone about to announce a national emergency. "Is it Park Day?" She asked it the same way every single Saturday, like there was any chance the answer had changed overnight. "It's Park Day," he said back. She allowed herself exactly 1 second of visible joy before spinning back toward her room. And Daniel felt that quiet, nameless kind of happiness settle into his chest, the kind that doesn't announce itself. It just stays. To look at him, you wouldn't guess there was anything remarkable about Daniel Rourke. Tall, broad through the shoulders, early 40s, close-cropped hair, a face that looked weathered rather than old, plain gray t-shirt, jeans that had seen better years. He drove a truck with over 200,000 miles on it and worked 3 days a week doing logistics consulting. Enough to keep the lights on, enough to be home for pickup and drop-off. The one thing you would notice was the scar. It ran from his left temple down the curve of his jaw, a long pale ridge that pulled slightly at the corner of his eye whenever he smiled. People always noticed. Some asked. Most didn't. He never explained it to anyone, and he'd learned a long time ago that silence alone was usually enough to make the questions stop. By 8:30, they were walking through the door of a coffee shop called the Mill House on the corner of 9th and Alder. Their standing Saturday tradition, ever since the winter after his wife passed. 3 years running without a single miss. Nora held his hand the whole way and told him, in exhaustive detail, about a drawing she'd made at school of a horse that, by her own admission, looked suspiciously like a dog. He listened to every word like it was the most important briefing of his week. The Mill House was packed, the way it always was on Saturdays. Every table full. A line curling back from the register. The smell of fresh bread fighting with dark roast coffee for control of the room. Daniel ordered his usual black coffee, Nora's usual hot chocolate, and they found their table by the window. For about 4 minutes, everything was exactly the way it was supposed to be. Then Nora spotted something on the chalkboard menu and turned too fast to point at it. The cup tipped. Slow motion. In that specific way, disasters always seem to move just a half second faster than you can stop them. Daniel reached, too late. The cup hit the floor and hot chocolate fanned out across the tile in a wide dark splash, landing directly across the shoes of the woman standing behind her. That woman was Vanessa Cole. Daniel knew exactly who she was, the way everyone in this city did. Business section headlines, the occasional magazine cover, the low-grade cultural awareness that comes from being one of the wealthiest people in a mid-sized American city. Mid-40s, dressed in a way that made the entire cafe look underdressed by comparison. Phone still pressed to her ear when the hot chocolate hit her shoes. She looked down, then at Nora, still on the floor, eyes already filling with tears. The specific look of a kid who knows something's gone wrong and is bracing to find out how bad. Vanessa ended her call. Nora, kid, what is wrong with you? Her voice wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. Precise. Deliberate. Every word placed exactly where it would do the most damage. Do you have any idea what you just did? Do you know what these shoes cost? Where are your parents? Who lets a child run wild in a public place like this? Nora started crying. Daniel was out of his chair before Vanessa finished her second sentence. 4 steps. He crossed the room, dropped to a crouch beside his daughter, and checked her hands, her knees, making sure nothing had actually hurt her. Nothing had. He pulled her up gently, kept a hand on her shoulder, and rose to his full height to face Vanessa Cole for the first time. She's 6, he said. She tripped. Then to Nora, not to Vanessa. Are you hurt, baby? Nora shook her head and buried her face against his side. Then we're getting you cleaned up, he said quietly. Then back to Vanessa. I'll pay for the cleaning. I'd like you to apologize to my daughter. The cafe had gone quieter around them. Not silent. Not yet, but the kind of quiet where 20 people are pretending very hard not to be listening. Vanessa looked at him the way you'd look at something you'd nearly stepped in. Apologize, she repeated flat, almost amused, like he'd suggested something absurd. Your daughter just ruined a pair of shoes that cost more than you probably make in a month, and you want me to apologize? She's a kid, Daniel said. She made a mistake. That's different from doing something wrong. I don't need a parenting lecture from you. Vanessa glanced around the room with the ease of someone who had never once worried about being watched. You want to do something useful? Take her home and teach her how to behave in public. Daniel didn't raise his voice. Didn't take a single step closer. I'm going to ask you one more time. Please apologize to my daughter. Something shifted behind Vanessa's eyes. A tightening. A slight lift of the chin. The exact look of someone who has not been spoken to like this in a very, very long time, and is finding the experience genuinely offensive. You have no idea who you're talking to, she said, voice dropping half an octave. I have personal relationships with 3 city council members, the deputy chief of police, and 2 sitting judges. I make one phone call, and you won't just lose this argument. You'll lose custody of that child before the week is out. CPS takes anonymous tips very seriously, especially from credible sources. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Nora heard every single one of them. Daniel felt her go rigid against his side, felt both her small hands grab onto his, and when she looked up at him, her face was pure, uncomplicated fear. Daniel looked down at her, then back at Vanessa. He thought about the drive home, about the park 3 blocks away, about every version of this moment where he simply turned around and walked out, and without meaning to, taught his daughter that some people's anger you just have to swallow. He didn't move. Vanessa made the call before he said another word. Phone out. That practiced ease of someone who has ended arguments this way plenty of times before. Clipped, businesslike, not asking for help, issuing instructions. Daniel caught the words attorney and documentation before she turned slightly away, like the conversation was private, despite the fact that every person within 15 feet could hear all of it. She hung up and looked at him with something close to satisfaction. My attorney will be here in 20 minutes, she said. I'd sit back down if I were you. Daniel didn't sit down. You can also expect a call from CPS within the hour, she continued, sliding her phone back into her bag. I have a contact there. Very thorough. Especially when there are concerns about a child's home environment. Behind the counter, 2 baristas had completely stopped pretending to work. One stood frozen with a milk pitcher in her hand. The manager hovered near the register, doing the math on how to intervene with someone who tipped generously and came in 4 times a week. He didn't intervene. At the window tables, 3 phones were already out. One was already filming. Daniel hadn't moved from the exact spot he'd been standing in since this started. His hand rested on Nora's shoulder. She'd stopped crying, but she was locked onto his side with both arms around his waist, telling him without a single word that she needed him to stay put. "You done?" Daniel asked. Vanessa blinked. It was small, barely visible, but it was there. She'd expected several possible responses. That was not one of them. "I beg your pardon?" "You made your calls," Daniel said. "You said your piece. I'm still here. My daughter is still here. And I'm still asking you to apologize to her." The room had gone so quiet the espresso machine sounded aggressive. Vanessa stared at him for a long moment. Really stared, the way you'd study a structural problem you couldn't quite locate the source of. Then something in her face hardened, and she took one slow step forward. Her bodyguard started moving from the door. And the slap came without warning. 1 second she was standing there, expression locked into something cold and final. The next, her hand swung up in a sharp arc and connected with the side of Daniel's face with a crack that cut through the last of the noise in the room like a blade through fabric. Total silence. Not the partial, uncertain quiet from before. Total. The kind of silence that only exists when something happens that nobody in the room has a script for. Someone exhaled audibly near the counter. A kid 2 tables over burst into tears. Not because anything happened to her, just because the sound itself was terrifying. The barista set her milk pitcher down like sudden movement might make things worse. Nora didn't cry. She went completely still, arms still locked around her father's waist, face turned up toward him, and her expression wasn't fear anymore. It was something closer to waiting. Like some part of her already understood that whatever happened in the next few seconds mattered more than everything that came before it. Daniel didn't stagger, didn't raise his hands. The blow had turned his head to the side, and he brought it back, slow, unhurried. The movement of a man who had already decided exactly how he was going to respond to this, and was simply following through on the decision. He looked at Vanessa with eyes that held no fury, no wounded pride, no shock. Just a stillness, so complete it seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than this room. Vanessa's hand was still raised. She lowered it, and that's when Grant moved from the door. Big man, 6'2", built like a bank vault, mid-50s, the kind of stillness that comes from a career spent being paid to stay calm. 12 years in private security, 4 of them for Vanessa. Very good at his job. He crossed the floor in long, measured strides, planted himself between his employer and Daniel, and got ready to do exactly what he was paid to do. Then he looked at Daniel's face. The scar, left temple to jaw, in that long, irregular, unmistakable curve. The specific pattern that comes from fragmented metal traveling at extremely high velocity. Not an accident. Not a bar fight. A very particular category of violence. One Grant recognized instantly because he'd lived through it himself. He'd seen that exact scar once before. March 15 years ago, in a burning building outside a compound he was never supposed to talk about. On a man who came back through a collapsing doorway a second time to pull Grant out by the vest, while his own face was actively bleeding onto the floor. Grant stopped dead. Every ounce of professional momentum that had carried him across that room just stopped. He stood 3 feet from Daniel and didn't move a muscle. The color drained out of his face in one visible wave. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. For several seconds the room was so silent that people 2 tables away heard him finally exhale. He took a step back. "I can't," he said. Quiet. Uneven. Barely above a murmur. But the room was so still it carried anyway. He turned to Vanessa, and his face held an expression she had never once seen on him. "I can't do this. Not to this man." Vanessa stared at him. "What are you talking about?" Grant didn't answer her. He was still looking at Daniel. "Grant." Her voice carried the edge of someone who had never in her life had to repeat an instruction. "What are you doing? Do your job." Grant didn't move. "Ma'am," he said, still not looking at her. "I need you to understand something. I don't need you to explain anything to me. 2nd Battalion. Special Forces. Overseas deployment 15 years ago." His voice was quiet, but something in the way he said it made Vanessa stop mid-sentence. The cafe stayed frozen in that same suspended stillness. Nobody left. Nobody spoke. Every single person in that room understood, without being told, that they were watching something they needed to witness. "There was a compound," Grant continued, talking to the whole room now, not just to her. "Extraction op hostage situation. 6-man team. The building was rigged, and we didn't know it until the first device went off." He paused. His jaw worked once. 3 of us got out clean. 2 didn't make it. I was pinned in a second-floor corner. Ceiling half collapsed, both exits blocked, the whole structure burning around me. Maybe 4 minutes before the smoke alone finished the job. He stopped again. He came back in the first time and got Reyes out. Broken leg, couldn't move on his own. Carried him out over one shoulder, straight through a doorway that was already on fire. By the counter, people had stopped pretending to look away. A man in his 60s, sitting alone in the corner, set down his coffee and sat up very straight, watching Grant with total focused attention. Then he went back in, Grant said. For me, the whole building was coming down. He had zero reason to go back. The mission was technically done. Any reasonable person calls it there. He went back anyway. Second device went off while he was on the stairs. That's where the scar's from. He was still moving when it detonated. Got to me. Got me to the window. Got me out. Grant exhaled slowly. I never saw him again after that night. His file got buried at a clearance level I never had access to. I didn't even learn his name until 6 months later. The old man in the corner stood up. Gray hair, posture that didn't belong to civilian life. He looked at Daniel and gave one single, deliberate nod. The kind that means something specific to anyone who's ever worn a uniform. Daniel looked back and nodded once. This is absurd, Vanessa said. Her voice had lost some of its precision. Not much, but enough to notice. This is completely absurd. You're standing here telling me this man is some kind of... I'm telling you what I know, Grant said. What I saw. You could be making this up. He could have put you up to this. I don't know this man. I don't know anything about. Ma'am. Grant finally turned and looked at her directly. Not angry. Something quieter. Final. I have the medical records. I have the incident report. I have a scar on my side that matches the exit point of the same device that did that to his face. He paused. I'm not making any of this up. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since she'd walked into that cafe, she had absolutely nothing to say. Here's the part she didn't know yet, the part that changes everything. A woman named Priya, sitting 2 tables back, had started filming the second the cup hit the floor. She caught the argument, the threats, the slap, Grant's entire confession, word for word. And somewhere in the middle of it, without fully deciding to, she'd already uploaded it to 3 different platforms, before Grant even finished his sentence. The first notification lit up a stranger's phone 40 seconds later. Then another. Then 6 more in rapid succession, from 6 different tables. That specific cascade of buzzing that only happens when something has already escaped the room it started in, and is now moving through the world entirely on its own. Vanessa heard it. She looked around at the phones lighting up table after table, and for the first time all morning, her expression cracked into something that wasn't anger, wasn't contempt. It was the first real flicker of alarm. The door opened. 2 officers walked in unhurried, hands at their sides, the pace of a staff call, not an emergency. They scanned the room, clocked the tension, and moved toward the center of it. The older one, a sergeant named Halloran, looked at Daniel first. Then Grant. Then Vanessa. Got a call from the staff, he said. Somebody want to walk me through this? 3 people started talking at once. Halloran raised one hand, and they all stopped. One at a time. Priya stood up and turned her phone around. I have the whole thing. From the beginning. Halloran watched it. His partner watched over his shoulder. The audio carried just far enough for the nearest tables to catch it too. Vanessa's voice, sharp and precise, threatening to have a child taken away. Then the slap. Then silence. Then Grant's voice, low and steady, explaining a burning building 15 years ago. Halloran handed the phone back without a word. Looked at Vanessa. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step outside with me. I'm not going anywhere. I want to file a complaint against. Ma'am. His voice didn't rise or drop. You're not under arrest. I'm asking you to step outside so we can get a statement. I'll also tell you, based on the video and the witnesses in this room, you may be looking at a simple assault charge. You don't have to say anything else until you've spoken with your attorney, who I understand is already on the way. He said it the way people say things that aren't really requests. Vanessa looked at him. Looked at Grant, standing motionless, eyes on the floor. Looked at Daniel, who was looking right back at her with the exact same expression he'd worn since the moment the slap landed. Not triumphant. Not angry. Just present. Immovable. She picked up her bag. Walked to the door. Every single person in that cafe watched her go. Nobody looked away. Nobody said a word. The only sound was her heels against the tile, and the door swinging open into the morning light. Nora looked up at her father. "Daddy, are you okay?" Daniel crouched down, wrapped both arms around her, and held on for a long moment before he answered. "Yeah, baby. I'm okay." By sundown, the video had 2 million views. By midnight, 4 national news outlets had picked it up, a veterans advocacy group with 3 million followers had shared it, and a cable news channel was running the words, "CEO attacks decorated veteran in cafe, caught on camera." By Sunday morning, people who had never set foot in this city were saying Daniel Rourke's name in conversations he had no part of and no control over. His phone had been off since noon Saturday. He'd shut it down in the parking lot right after giving his statement. While Nora sat in the back seat eating a granola bar he'd dug out of the glove box. He looked at the screen, already flooding with numbers he didn't recognize, and turned it off the way you close a door you have absolutely no intention of reopening. Then he drove to the park. 40 minutes late. The park didn't care. The swings were still there. Nora ran ahead down the path the way she always did, arms out for balance, and Daniel walked behind her, hands in his pockets, the side of his face still faintly warm. They stayed 2 hours. Monday, the consequences started arriving in waves. Vanessa's board called an emergency session. 3 corporate partners issued statements quietly distancing themselves from her, while very carefully avoiding language that implicated the company itself. A 4th partner suspended their contract entirely, pending review. By Tuesday afternoon, Vanessa Cole was on a voluntary leave of absence from her own company. The kind of voluntary that comes with a board resolution, a prepared statement, and absolutely zero actual choice involved. Her lawyers put out a statement calling it a private dispute, misrepresented by selectively edited footage. That statement lasted about 6 hours, right up until the unedited 43-minute recording surfaced. After that, the lawyers said a lot less. Daniel knew none of this as it happened. He kept his phone off for 3 straight days. What he knew was Nora. She didn't bring up the cafe on Sunday, didn't bring it up Monday either, and he didn't push. 7 years in, he'd learned she processed things quietly, on her own schedule, and then all at once, when she was finally ready. It came Sunday night. She was already in bed, lamp turned down low, staring at the ceiling with the specific look she got when something was working itself loose behind her eyes. "Daddy," she said, not looking at him. "Have you ever been scared?" He sat down on the edge of her bed. "Actually thought about it." "Yeah," he said. "Lots of times." She turned her head toward him. "What did you do?" "I did what needed doing anyway," he said. "Being scared doesn't mean you stop. It just means you keep going while you're scared." She looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said finally, in the tone she used when something got filed away for good. He turned off the lamp, sat with her in the dark until her breathing slowed into sleep. Then he sat there a little longer. 6 weeks later, the civil hearing began on a Thursday morning. Vanessa arrived without a motorcade. 1 car, 1 attorney, no security. Grant had resigned the Monday after the cafe. A short, professional email that said exactly as much as it needed to and not 1 word more. She wore a dark gray suit, expensive but not flashy, and walked in with the posture of someone determined not to let the circumstances dictate how she carried herself, and finding it much harder than she'd expected. The room was small, a municipal hearing chamber. 12 rows of seating, a raised platform up front. Daniel was already seated when she arrived, dark button-down shirt, the same quiet expression from that Saturday morning. Nora wasn't there. She was spending the morning with a neighbor's daughter from her class. The presiding officer called the session to order. Vanessa's attorney stood first and delivered a statement that was precise, measured, and almost entirely beside the point. It acknowledged the incident, framed it around the pressures of her professional obligations, suggested the public reaction had been disproportionate. It was the kind of statement that was technically accurate in nearly every detail, and true in almost none of them. When he sat down, the presiding officer looked at Vanessa. "Ms. Cole, do you wish to add anything?" Vanessa glanced at her attorney. He gave the smallest possible shake of his head, the universal signal for "we said what we needed to say, don't add to it." She looked at Daniel instead. He wasn't looking at her with anger. Wasn't looking at her with satisfaction either. Just the same way he'd looked at her in that cafe, present, waiting for whatever came next, with no visible stake in what it would be. She stood up. "I want to say something," she said. "Not through counsel." Just me. Her attorney's face didn't move, but something tightened around his eyes. Vanessa turned to face Daniel directly. I watched the video, she said. Many times. The first few times, I told myself the context was missing. That people didn't understand the whole situation. That the reaction was out of proportion. She paused. I was lying to myself. The video showed exactly what happened. I said things to you, and to your daughter, designed to cause harm. And then I hit you. In front of your child. In front of a full room. Another pause longer. There's no version of that which is defensible. I knew that before I even walked in here today. She didn't look away from him. I'm sorry, she said. Not because I'm standing here and it's the appropriate thing to say. Because it's true, and it's the only thing I have left that's worth saying. The room stayed quiet. Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once, the same nod the old veteran had given him in that cafe 6 weeks earlier. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Just acknowledgement. One person confirming that another person's words had landed. He didn't say anything back. The presiding officer read the formal findings into the record: financial restitution, a formal injunction, a permanent notation that would follow Vanessa's professional history no matter what she rebuilt afterward. Nothing was erased. Nothing was forgiven in any legal sense. The costs were real, and they were permanent, and she paid them without trying to negotiate a single one down. She'd stopped trying to control the outcome the moment she stood up without her lawyer's permission. 4 months after the hearing, on a Tuesday in early December, an envelope showed up in Daniel's mailbox. Plain white. No return address. His name and apartment number written in slow, careful handwriting. The kind that belongs to someone who's had to start over more than once before finally getting it right. He stood in the hallway and looked at it for a while before opening it. Inside was a single handwritten page. And beneath it, wrapped in tissue paper, a small hardback coloring book full of detailed horse illustrations. A dozen breeds, a dozen settings, with a set of colored pencils tucked into a sleeve on the cover. He recognized it instantly. 3 weeks earlier, walking past a bookstore on the way to the grocery store, Nora had stopped dead in front of the window display and pointed at that exact book with the total certainty of a 6-year-old who knows precisely what she wants. She'd stood there almost a full minute, just looking at it. He'd meant to go back for it. Hadn't gotten around to it yet. The letter explained the rest. Vanessa had been in that same bookstore, 2 weeks after the hearing, looking for something meaningful to send, not something expensive. She'd asked the woman behind the counter what kids actually loved. The woman mentioned a little girl who'd stood outside the window for the longest time, just staring. Vanessa bought it without a second thought. Some things find their way to the right place without anyone engineering it. Daniel stood in that hallway for a long time. Then he went inside, set the book on the kitchen table, and read the letter twice, standing up, before folding it and putting it in the drawer where. He kept the things that actually mattered: Nora's birth certificate, his discharge papers, a photo of his wife from the summer before she got sick. The letter went in there without ceremony, right alongside everything else he kept because it was true. He never told Nora where the book came from. When she found it on the table 20 minutes later, her reaction was exactly what a 6-year-old's reaction to an unexpected gift is supposed to be: immediate, total, completely uncomplicated by any of the history behind it. She climbed into her chair, opened the cover, and started examining every page like she was reviewing something extremely important. Then she looked up. Who gave this to us? Daniel sat down across from her. Thought about how to answer honestly, without handing her more than she needed to carry. Someone who's trying to be better, he said. She considered that carefully. Are they doing okay? I think so, Daniel said. I think they're working on it. Nora nodded, apparently satisfied, and turned back to her book. She picked a pencil, burnt orange, for reasons entirely her own, and started filling in the outline of a horse standing in a field, tongue pressed against her lower lip the way it always did when she concentrated. Afternoon light came through the window and fell across the table, across her hands, across the open pages. The scar on Daniel's face caught that same light the way it always did. That long pale line from temple to jaw, the mark of one specific night in a burning building, a world away from this kitchen, this table, this ordinary, unrepeatable afternoon. He didn't think about that night at all. He just watched his daughter draw a horse, and for once thought about nothing. Power can make people feared. Character is what makes them remembered. If this one stuck with you, send it to someone who needs it today. And if you're not subscribed yet, There's another story just like it waiting for you right now.